The planet had no name, at least not anymore. Long ago, it may have been something great, but now it was only a quiet place covered in dust, broken stones, and strange metal shapes sticking out of the ground. Winds moved slowly across the empty land, carrying a dry sound that made the place feel even more lonely. In the middle of all this silence lived a very small alien dragon, no bigger than a human child. His body was thin and light, his scales dull from lack of food, and his wings often shook when he tried to move them. He had lived here for as long as he could remember, and every day felt almost the same as the day. Before Dot the little dragon, though he hardly thought of himself as anything special, woke up to the weak morning light, filtering through cracks in the rocks where he slept. His home was nothing more than a broken cave formed fallen metal pieces. It wasn't warm, and it wasn't safe, but it kept him away from the harsh storms and the strange noises that sometimes echoed through the air at night. When he stepped outside, the ground felt cold under his claws. He sniffed the air, hoping to smell something that could be eaten. Most days he found nothing except dust. Sometimes he discovered tiny glowing plants buried deep in the ground, just enough to keep him alive but not enough to make him strong. He had learned to live with hunger. It became a quiet part of him, like a shadow that followed him everywhere. Despite being weak, he still walked around the planet every day. Not because he enjoyed it, but because he hoped he might one day find something different, something that told him he wasn't truly alone. The planet was big, and in his heart he felt there had to be a reason he was here. He didn't understand the past very well. He only remembered flashes, bright lights, loud voices, and taller creatures who looked down on him. The memories were confusing, so he tried not to think about them too much. As he wandered, he often stopped at the tall metal ruins. They were old, covered in rust-like dust, and shaped almost like towers from another world. He didn't know who built them, or why they were abandoned. Sometimes he sat by them and listened to the wind whistle through the cracks. The sound made him feel like the planet was trying to speak to him, though he could never understand what it was saying. Hours passed as he searched for food. He found a small glowing root under a rock and chewed on it carefully. It didn't taste good, but it gave him a little bit of energy. After eating, he climbed a gentle hill to look around. The view was the same as always: flat land, broken structures, and storms building in the far distance. But he still looked, hoping he might someday see something new. The sun, though much weaker than Earth's, slowly moved across the sky. As the day warmed, he tried flapping his wings. He dreamed of flying, even if he had never actually done it. His wings were too weak, and every attempt left him tired. But he kept trying. Even if it took years, he believed he might one day lift off the ground. Maybe from the sky he could find a place that felt like home. While resting under a tilted metal beam, he noticed a tiny insect-like creature crawling across the sand. It had a soft glow on its back and moved slowly. Curious, the small dragon lowered his head and watched it. The insect paused, almost as if studying him. For a moment, he felt a strange comfort. Even the smallest living thing on this empty planet felt like a friend. He didn't touch it, not wanting to scare it away. He only watched until it disappeared into a crack in the ground. Later, when the wind picked up, he hurried back to his cave. The storms on the planet weren't violent enough to destroy everything, but they carried sharp dust that stung his eyes. As he curled up in the cave, he looked out at the swirling sky. The clouds turned a dull red color, and flashes of light sparkled quietly behind them, almost like silent lightning. He had seen these storms since he was very small, yet they always gave him a strange feeling. Not fear, exactly, but something close to it. Like the storm was hiding something. He waited until the storm passed. When he stepped outside again, the air was cooler, and the ground was covered in a thin layer of fresh dust. He shook some off his wings and walked forward, noticing that parts of the metal ruins had been uncovered by the wind. Something shiny caught his eye. He walked closer and gently tapped it with his claw. It seemed like a broken part of a machine, smooth and silver, with lines carved into it. He couldn't read the symbols, but he felt a faint warmth coming from it, almost like a memory he couldn't fully recall. He took it back to his cave and placed it near a corner with other small objects. He had collected over the years pieces of glass, metal fragments, and tiny round stones. He didn't know what any of them meant, but collecting them made him feel like he was building something. Maybe not a home, but a kind of comfort. When night started to fall, the sky shifted into deep shades of blue and purple. Stars appeared slowly, blinking like gentle eyes. The small dragon looked up at them the way someone might look at faraway family. He always wondered if anyone lived out there, watching the same sky from another world. Maybe someone like him. Maybe someone waiting for him. He didn't know, but the thought made him feel less alone. As the air cooled, he curled into his usual spot. He tried to sleep, but his mind wandered. He felt something in the air that night, something different. It wasn't dangerous, and it wasn't like the storms. It was more like a quiet pull, as if the planet itself knew something was coming. The little dragon lifted his head and looked around. Everything was still. Too still. He stretched his wings, listening to the silence. It felt heavy, like the calm before something big. He wished he understood what it meant, but all he could do was wait. With a slow breath, he lay back down, closing his eyes. He didn't know that far above the planet, hidden behind the stars he admired, something was moving. Something that would change everything he ever knew. The peaceful quiet around him was only the last moment of calm before a new chapter of his life would begin, one he never expected, and one he wasn't sure he was ready for. But for now, he slept, unaware of the ship drawing closer, unaware of the past he had forgotten, and unaware of the future that was about to arrive. The next morning began like any other day on the quiet planet. The small dragon woke to the soft glow of the weak sun, stretched his wings, and stepped outside his cave. He felt tired from the strange feeling he sensed the night before, but he didn't understand why. He walked slowly across the dusty ground, sniffing the air for food and checking the same places he always checked. At first, everything seemed normal, but as he took a few more steps, a sound reached him, one he had not heard in a very long time. It was low at first, like a soft hum far above the clouds. He froze, listening carefully. The sound grew louder, but not in a scary way. It was more like the sky was vibrating. He looked up, squinting, but the light made it hard to see anything clearly. The hum became deeper with each passing moment. Dust began to rise from the ground in tiny swirls. The little dragon felt the pull again, the same feeling that had made the night seem strange. His heart began to beat faster. It wasn't the storms. It wasn't the wind. It was something else. Something that did not belong to this planet. He backed up a few steps, eyes fixed on the sky. Then he saw it. A small, sharp light cut across the atmosphere, moving slowly but smoothly. It wasn't like a shooting star. It didn't fall. It glided, controlled and steady. A shape followed the light, a large, dark object with a shine like metal. It was a ship. The little dragon stood still, unsure if he should hide or keep watching. Long ago, before his memories became blurry, he had seen ships like this. He remembered flashes of metal walls, voices speaking fast, and cold lights overhead. He couldn't remember everything, but he remembered the feeling they gave him, a feeling that made his chest tighten. The ship circled the planet once, as if searching for something. Then its engines changed sound, becoming lower and slower. It was preparing to land. The dragon hurried back into his cave. He didn't want to be seen. His heart thumped so loudly he thought the ship might hear it. He curled himself deep inside the darkest corner, pulling his wings close to his body. All he could do was wait. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. The ship touched the ground somewhere far across the dusty plains. He heard a deep rumble as it settled, and the sound of its engines fading. Then silence. A heavy silence. Curiosity slowly overcame fear. After some time, he stepped outside and stood at the mouth of his cave. The air looked normal again, but he knew something had changed. He could feel it. From where he stood, he could faintly see smoke or dust rising from the direction of the landing. He hesitated. Part of him wanted to stay hidden. Another part of him, stronger and more stubborn, wanted to see who had come. After thinking for a long moment, he decided to move. Not close enough to be caught, but close enough to understand what was happening. He walked carefully through the empty plains, taking slow steps and keeping his body low to the ground. Every sound made him stop and listen. As he approached a nearby hill, he climbed it slowly and peered over the top. Below, on the flat land, sat the ship, large, gray, and shaped like a smooth stone. It had legs that reached into the dirt and lights that glowed softly on its sides. A ramp extended from the center, leading down to the ground. At the base of the ramp, figures moved. They were tall, much taller than the dragon. Their skin was pale and smooth, and they wore simple suits that matched the color of the ship. They walked with confidence, as if the planet belonged to them. Some carried tools that looked heavy, shining in the sun. Others scanned the ground with strange devices. The dragon watched, his eyes wide. These were the same beings from his faint memories. He didn't know their names, but he remembered their presence. He remembered being smaller, confused, surrounded by them. He remembered their voices sounding sharp and cold. He didn't know if they were good or bad, only that they were powerful. One of the tall beings walked to a large metal panel they had set on the ground. He pressed a button, and a scanning light shot upward. The dragon ducked behind a rock, heart racing. The light passed inches away from where he hid, but did not catch him. He waited until the light disappeared, then slowly lifted his head again. The tall beings seemed busy. They were pulling strange mineral pieces from the ground, collecting them in containers. They moved like they had done this many times. The dragon didn't understand what they wanted, but he could tell they didn't come just to explore. They came with a purpose. They came to take something. As he watched them work, one of the beings lifted a heavy tool and accidentally dropped it. The sound echoed across the plain, making the dragon jump. The tall being said something the dragon didn't understand and picked up the tool again. Shaking dust off it, the dragon took a small step backward, ready to return to his cave. But then one of the beings suddenly stopped moving. The being lifted something from the ground, something small and familiar. It was one of the glowing roots the dragon ate. The being studied it carefully, then turned to show it to another. They began speaking, pointing at different parts of the land. The dragon felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. If they were interested in the same food he needed to survive, things could become very difficult. He turned to leave, but his foot slipped on loose dust. The rock beneath him rolled down the hill. The sound wasn't loud, but the slope made it echo strangely across the plain. The tall beings paused. One of them turned, then another. The dragon ducked behind a rock, holding his breath. His heart pounded so hard he thought the ground might notice. A moment of silence followed. Then one of the tall beings began to walk toward the hill. The dragon stayed perfectly still. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe. Every tiny muscle in his body froze. The steps grew closer and closer. Dust crunched softly Under the being's boots, another being followed. And then another. The dragon felt panic rising. If they climbed the hill, they would see him. He knew how fast they could move. He knew how strong they were. Even though he didn't fully remember what happened long ago, he remembered their cold eyes. He remembered feeling small and helpless around them. The first being reached the base of the hill. He raised a scanning device and pressed a button. A soft light spread across the rocks. The dragon closed his eyes, afraid the light would find him. But the wind shifted at that moment, and dust blew across the beam. The device beeped, confused. The being adjusted it, tapped it, and tried again. Still nothing. The wind continued pushing dust between the scanner and the hill. After a moment, the tall being lowered the device and said something in a disappointed tone. One of the others shrugged. They slowly turned around and walked back toward the ship. The dragon stayed hidden until the last of them disappeared behind the metal structure. He didn't relax right away. He waited many minutes, listening to the soft hum of their machines. Finally, he lifted his head slightly. The tall beings returned to their work, no longer thinking about the sound from the hill. He quietly crawled backward and slipped away from the area. He didn't run. Running would make noise. Instead, he moved with slow, careful steps until the ship was far behind him. Once he was far enough, he paused and took a deep breath. His legs felt weak. His wings trembled. He had not been that close to those beings since he was very young. The memories he had pushed aside now stirred within him. He remembered bright rooms, sharp lights, and a feeling of being tested. He didn't understand why they brought him here or why they left him. But seeing them again awakened old fears. He walked back to his cave, trying to calm himself. The sky above him looked peaceful again, as if nothing unusual had happened. But he knew things had changed. The beings had returned to the planet for a reason, and he didn't know what they wanted. When he reached his cave, he curled up inside, but sleep did not come easily. His mind kept returning to the tall figures, their tools, their scanning lights, and the sound of their voices. He wondered if they would stay for long. He wondered if they would search the planet more deeply. He wondered if they remembered him as the night grew darker. The ship's lights glowed faintly on the horizon, reminding him that he was no longer alone on the planet, and that his quiet, lonely world was about to change in ways he couldn't yet understand. But deep inside him, a tiny spark of curiosity mixed with fear. Something told him this was just the beginning of a much bigger story. The next morning arrived quiet, but the small dragon didn't feel calm at all. He woke up with a tight feeling in his chest, like something heavy was sitting inside him. He remembered the tall beings, their ship, and the way they almost found him the day before. Even though he tried to convince himself they wouldn't bother him again, he couldn't stop thinking about them. The feeling of danger hung in the air, even though everything around him looked normal. He stepped outside his cave and looked at the horizon. The sky was pale and soft, and the ground still carried the marks left by the night's gentle wind. But far away, near the direction of the ship, a thin smoke-like line rose into the sky. It was faint, but it told him the beings were still there. He walked a few steps forward, unsure of what to do. He didn't want to get close to them again, but he also didn't want to stay in fear. For most of his life, he had only known silence and the simple struggle to survive. But now his world had changed. Something new had entered it, and he couldn't hide from it forever. After a few minutes of thinking, he decided to follow a different path, away from the ship. He thought maybe exploring another part of the planet would help calm his mind. So he walked toward a long ridge of broken stones he had never fully explored. The air felt crisp, and as he moved, tiny flecks of glowing dust sparkled briefly under the sunlight. The planet wasn't completely empty. Small glowing insects moved between cracks, Strange little plants peeked out from the dry soil, and sometimes gentle echoes traveled across the plains. The dragon liked those sounds. They made the world feel alive. Not crowded, not dangerous, just alive. He walked for a while, letting the sounds relax him. Eventually, he reached a collection of tall rock formations, shaped like thin fingers pointing to the sky. He moved between them, brushing his claws lightly along their smooth surfaces. The rocks were cool, and faint metallic lines ran across them, almost like old markings left behind by someone long ago. He didn't know what they meant, but he found them comforting. As he explored the rocks, something unusual happened. He felt a gentle vibration under his feet. Not strong, but enough to make him stop and look around. At first he thought it might be the wind, but there was no breeze. Then he heard a soft sound behind him, almost like a small stone shifting. He turned around slowly, expecting maybe another insect or a tiny creature. Instead, he saw someone standing between two rocks. He was one of the tall beings. The dragon froze. He didn't know how long the being had been there. Had he followed him? Had he been searching? The dragon's body tensed, and he took a small step backward, ready to run if needed. But the being didn't move closer. He just stood there quietly, holding something in his hands. His suit was lighter in color than the others, and he looked younger. The light reflected softly on his helmet, making it hard to see his face clearly. The dragon waited, unsure. The being slowly lowered the object he was holding, a small device with a soft light at the center. He placed it on the ground gently, and stepped back with both hands raised slightly, as if trying to show he meant no harm. The dragon had never seen one of the tall beings behave like that. Every memory he had of them involved coldness, testing, and indifference. But this one's movements were slow, careful, almost unsure. The dragon tilted his head, watching closely. The being crouched down, moving slowly so the dragon wouldn't run away. He reached to his belt and detached a small container, placing it next to the device. Then he pushed it toward the dragon with the tips of his fingers. The dragon sniffed the air. The container didn't smell dangerous. It had a faint sweet scent, like the glowing plants he sometimes ate. Still, he didn't move closer yet. The being waited. After a long moment, the dragon slowly crept forward, step by cautious step. The being didn't move. The dragon reached the container and peered inside. To his surprise, it was filled with small pieces of soft plant-like material, fresh and colorful, nothing like the dry roots he usually found. He took a slow breath and gently bit into one piece. The taste was soft, sweet, and comforting. It felt like a warm wave spreading through his thin body. He looked up at the being, unsure why he was being given food. The being didn't reach out or try to grab him. He simply watched. The dragon ate another piece, then another, slower this time. He stayed alert, ready to run if anything changed. But nothing changed. Finally, when the container was empty, the dragon stepped back. The being stood up slowly. He didn't try to take the container back. He pointed toward the rocks and said something in his soft voice. The dragon didn't understand the words, but the tone didn't sound sharp or commanding. It sounded gentle. The dragon stared at him for a while. He still didn't trust him, but he didn't feel the same fear he felt around the others. The being reached for his pocket and took out a small round object that glowed faintly. He set it carefully on the ground again and took a few steps back. The dragon approached it slowly. The object gave off a soft warmth that felt pleasant against his claws. He lifted it with his mouth and set it down near a rock. The being watched and nodded slightly, almost like he was pleased. Just then, a voice called from far away. Another tall being, hidden behind one of the formations, shouted something. The young one stiffened and turned his head. It sounded like he was being called back. He made a small gesture toward the dragon, one that the dragon didn't understand, but sensed was meant to say goodbye. Then he quickly walked away between the rocks, disappearing in the direction of the ship. The dragon stayed alone among the formations, staring at the ground where the being had stood. He felt strange. In all his time on the planet, he had never met another creature who treated him with gentle hands. He didn't know why the young being behaved differently from the others. Was it curiosity? Was it kindness? Or was it something else? He carried the glowing round object back with him, gripping it carefully. When he reached his cave, he placed it next to his small collection of shiny items. Unlike the others, this one pulsed gently, like a small heartbeat. It made his cave feel slightly warmer. He sat down and thought about what had happened. His fear hadn't disappeared, but now it was mixed with something new: confusion, curiosity, and maybe a small drop of hope. The tall beings were still dangerous. He knew that. But one of them had shown him something he had never received before: care. He didn't sleep much that night. He lay awake, listening to distant sounds carried by the wind. Sometimes he imagined he heard soft footsteps or quiet voices. Sometimes he imagined he saw the young being's face again, watching him from the shadows. But the most surprising part of the night happened when the glowing object beside him flickered softly. He leaned closer. The glow increased for a moment, then slowly faded. It felt almost alive. He didn't know what the being intended by giving it to him. But one thing was clear. His life was changing, step by slow step, in ways he couldn't have predicted. And deep inside him, something long quiet began to stir, something like a spark. The small dragon woke early the next day. But instead of feeling scared like before, he felt something different. There was still worry inside him, yes, but there was also a quiet warmth he couldn't ignore. The glowing round object the young being had given him was resting near his claws, still giving off that soft heartbeat-like pulse. Every time he looked at it, he remembered the gentle way the being had placed the food on the ground. That moment kept replaying in his mind like a strange dream. He stepped outside his cave and stretched his wings. The morning air was cool, and the sky had a soft, pale glow. The world around him felt the same, yet he felt changed. He wasn't sure why, but he no longer felt as completely alone as before. He walked toward the rock formations again, the place where he had met the young being. He moved slowly, unsure if he would see him again, or if the previous day was just a one-time accident. When he reached the rocks, nothing was there. The area was quiet and empty, except for the high, thin stones and the little dust clouds the wind pushed around. Still, he stayed. He sat between two rocks and waited. He didn't know what he expected. Maybe the young being would return. Maybe he wouldn't. The dragon wasn't even sure what he would do if they met again. But something inside him wanted to see him again, even if it made him nervous. Time passed. The sun climbed higher. The planet remained silent, except for the occasional whistle of wind. The dragon began to think the being wouldn't come. Then he heard soft footsteps. They were quiet, gentle, and careful, very different from the heavy steps the other tall beings made. The dragon lifted his head. The young being appeared from behind one of the tall rocks, walking slowly, almost like he didn't want to frighten the dragon. For a moment, they both stood still. The being didn't rush toward him. He didn't make loud sounds or sudden movements. He simply raised one hand in a small greeting, the same way he had done yesterday. The dragon felt his body relax a little. The being reached into his bag and pulled out a small container again. This time, it wasn't filled with food, but with something else, tiny glowing crystals. The being held one between his fingers, and when the light from the sky hit it, the crystal sparkled like a star. He placed the container on the ground and gently pushed it toward the dragon. The dragon sniffed the crystals carefully. They didn't smell like food. They didn't smell dangerous either. He lifted one with his claw and turned it, watching the way it caught the light. It felt warm and smooth. He placed it down and looked at the being with curious eyes. The being smiled softly, not with his mouth, because his helmet covered it, but with the way his eyes squinted slightly. He pointed toward the rocks, then at the ground, then made a small motion with his hand that looked like drawing. The dragon didn't understand at first. But when the being walked to a nearby rock and tapped it gently, something clicked. The dragon walked over too. The rock had faint lines carved into its surface, old markings he had always wondered about. The being placed his hand over one of the markings, then looked at the dragon as if asking for permission. The dragon nodded slowly. The being touched a small device to the rock, and suddenly the markings glowed with a soft blue light. Not bright or frightening, just soft, gentle, and warm. The dragon stepped back in surprise. He had never seen the markings come alive before. The blue light traveled across the lines, spreading like water running through cracks. More and more markings lit up, forming shapes and symbols the dragon didn't understand. But something inside him responded to them. Something familiar. The young being stepped back to let the dragon look. The dragon moved closer, eyes wide. The glowing symbols felt connected to him somehow. They stirred memories deep inside his mind, old, buried memories. He didn't know what they meant, but they reminded him of warmth, light, and something that felt like home. He placed his claw gently on the glowing rock. The moment he touched it, a soft hum vibrated through the stone. The hum traveled up the rock and into the ground. The dragon felt it move through his body like a peaceful wave. His wings tingled, and for a brief moment, the dull scales on his back shimmered faintly. The being watched him carefully. Not with fear, but with amazement. The dragon pulled his claw back, trembling a little. The glow began to fade slowly, the blue light dimming until the rock returned to its normal dull color. But the dragon still felt the hum inside him, like a song that had just begun. The being stepped closer and held out his hand again, not to touch, just as a gentle gesture. The dragon didn't shy away. He tilted his head, wondering how this stranger understood things even he didn't understand about himself. Just then, a loud sound echoed across the plains. The dragon and the being both turned quickly. It was the sound of machinery, heavy, metallic, and sharp. It came from the direction of the ship. The being tensed immediately. He grabbed his scanning device and looked toward the noise. He made a quick motion to the dragon, a gesture telling him to hide. The dragon hesitated. He didn't want to leave, but something in the being's tone told him it was serious. So the dragon slipped between two rocks, peeking out from behind a shadow. Moments later, two other tall beings appeared from the direction of the ship. They were older, taller, and walked with the stiff confidence of people used to being obeyed. Their suits were darker, and their tools were larger. They spoke to each other in sharp tones, pointing at the ground and scanning the area. The young being lowered his head slightly as they approached him. One of them seemed to question him. The young being answered calmly, keeping his voice steady. He didn't mention the dragon. He didn't even glance in his direction. The two older beings checked their devices, pointed at different rocks, and discussed things the dragon couldn't understand. After a few minutes, they moved on, walking toward another part of the planet. The young being waited until their footsteps faded. Only then did he turn back to the dragon's hiding place and motion for him to come out. The dragon stepped forward slowly. He could see tension in the being's shoulders, as if hiding him had been a risk. The dragon felt a strange mix of gratitude and worry. He didn't fully understand the tall being's rules, but he could tell the young one had broken some of them. Just by being here, the being looked at him and made a simple gesture of reassurance. almost like saying, "It's okay." Then he pointed toward the old ruins that stretched across the distant plains. The dragon followed his gesture. The ruins were places he had always avoided. They looked ancient and dangerous, filled with fallen beams and strange machines. But the being seemed to be telling him there was more he needed to see. The dragon wasn't sure, but the glowing markings on the rock, the hum he felt inside, and the warm round object the being had given him the day before, all of it pointed to something bigger, something he didn't yet understand. The being slowly stepped backward, giving the dragon a look that felt almost like a quiet promise. Then he turned and headed back toward the ship before the others noticed his absence. The dragon stood among the rocks long after he disappeared. His heart was racing, not from fear this time, but from the strange feeling that he was standing at the edge of something important. He looked toward the ruins. For the first time in his life, they didn't seem frightening. They seemed like a place full of answers about his past, his kind, and the strange power inside him that he didn't yet understand. He took a deep breath, and he began to walk, not away from danger, but toward his own hidden story, toward the truth waiting in the ruins. The small dragon walked toward the distant ruins with slow but steady steps. The sky above him was still and pale, almost too quiet. Every time he thought about turning back, he remembered the humming glow that had moved through his body when he touched the marked rock. He remembered how the young being had protected him by pretending nothing was there. And he remembered the ruins the being had pointed toward, as if telling him that some truth waited inside them. So he kept walking. The ruins stretched far across the land, much larger than he ever realized. He had only explored their edges before, always afraid of what he might find deeper inside. Now he felt something pulling him forward, not fear, but a soft calling, like a faint memory trying to speak to him. When he reached the first tall structure, he paused. The walls rose high above him, covered in old lines and cracks. Some parts looked as if they had melted, others as if they had been shaped by careful hands long ago. A quiet wind moved between the broken pieces, making a soft, hollow sound. He stepped inside. The ground beneath him was covered in dust, but the deeper he walked, the less dust he saw. Strange, smooth symbols decorated the wall, symbols similar to what he had seen glowing earlier. He reached out and touched one. It didn't glow this time, but it felt warm, as if the wall remembered something. As he moved deeper, faint sounds echoed around him. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't insects. It was something else, something almost like voices. Not clear voices, not full words, but soft echoes from the past. He didn't feel scared. The sounds seemed gentle, almost welcoming. He walked into a wide open chamber. The ceiling, though cracked, was still mostly intact. In the center of the room stood a tall circular structure made of dark metal. It had sharp edges and deep grooves that spiraled around it. It looked ancient, like it had been waiting for someone to return for a very long time. The dragon approached it slowly. A faint vibration moved through the floor as he stepped closer. It reminded him of the hum he felt the day before. His chest tightened, not from fear, but from a strange kind of recognition. As if this place knew him, he placed his claw on the metal structure. The room shifted. Soft blue lines lit up all around him, running across the walls and floor like streams of light. The air warmed. A low tone vibrated from the metal, rising and falling like a heartbeat. The dragon stepped back in surprise, but the lights didn't stop. Instead, they grew brighter and shaped themselves into images floating, glowing and gentle. He stared, confused but mesmerized. The image formed the shape of a creature that looked like him. Not exactly the same, bigger, stronger, with bright shimmering scales and wide wings that seemed full of light. The creature floated above the metal circle, its outline glowing softly. Then more images appeared beside it, many creatures like him, flying in the air, resting in bright forests, moving with grace across glowing landscapes. There was peace in the images, harmony, something warm and beautiful. The dragon felt his heart pound with a strange mix of sadness and hope. He had never seen others like himself. His earliest memories were filled with metal runes and strange voices. But now he saw what he could have had, what his kind once was. The images changed. The glowing creatures began to dim. Storms formed around them. Tall beings, not the same as the ones currently on the planet, but similar, approached them holding strange devices. The creatures grew weak. Their light faded. One by one, the images of the shining dragons disappeared, until only one small one remained, tiny, thin. Alone, the small dragon felt a deep ache inside him. He stepped closer to the floating images, unable to look away. The last small dragon in the image was gently lifted by one of the tall beings. The image didn't show harm, only separation, like someone taking something they didn't understand. Then the final image showed a ship, descending onto a quiet planet, the same planet he lived on. The small dragon was placed on the ground. The tall beings left. The ship flew away, and the small dragon was alone. The lights faded. Silence returned to the chamber. The dragon stood still, trying to breathe normally. He finally understood something he had always felt deep inside, but could never explain. He wasn't born on this lonely planet. He wasn't meant to be alone. His kind had been something special once, something full of light. And he was the last one. A soft sound behind him made him turn. The young being stood at the entrance of the chamber, breathing slightly heavier than usual. He must have followed him. Maybe he had been searching for him. Or maybe he already knew this place was important. The dragon didn't run this time. He didn't hide. He stood where he was, letting the being approach. The young being stopped a few steps away, looking around in awe. The last of the glowing images faded just as he entered, but he seemed to understand that something important had happened here. He pointed at the metal structure, then at the dragon, with a look of recognition. Then he did something unexpected. He slowly knelt down, lowering himself so his height wasn't intimidating. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device shaped like a flat crystal. He tapped it gently, and a faint hologram appeared above it. The hologram showed symbols, ancient symbols, similar to those on the walls. The being pointed to them, then to the dragon, then to the room around them. It was clear he had been studying something. He was trying to tell the dragon that he knew this place belonged to his kind. The dragon stepped closer. Curious. The being sighed softly, as if releasing a heavy thought. He gently removed one glove and reached out his hand, not to grab, not to hold, but to show honesty. His fingers looked soft and warm, his gesture calm. The dragon looked at the hand for a long moment. Before, he would have been too scared to move. But now, something inside him had changed. He understood that this being had risked something to be here. He understood that he was not like the others. So he touched the being's hand with his claw, very lightly. A warmth flowed between them, gentle and reassuring. But the moment didn't last long. A sudden alarm echoed through the ruins. The dragon and the being both turned sharply. A glowing red light flashed through the cracks of the walls. Footsteps sounded outside the chamber, heavy, rushed, angry. The young being's eyes widened. He motioned for the dragon to hide, but it was too late. 3 tall beings burst into the chamber, carrying scanning devices and tools. They shouted at the young one, their tone sharp and filled with authority. One of them pointed at the dragon. Another pointed at the glowing remnants on the walls. The dragon felt fear flood him again. His wings tightened against his body. The ground seemed to vibrate beneath him. The young being stepped in front of him, not with anger, with protection. He spread his arms slightly, blocking the other's view. He said something loud and firm. The older beings shouted back, pointing at the dragon, at the chamber, at the glowing symbols. Their voices grew louder, echoing around the room. The dragon didn't understand the words, but he could feel the meaning. The older beings wanted to take him. They wanted to use him again, just like in the fading images he saw. They didn't care about what he lost or what he truly was. Something inside him snapped awake. A warm pulse began in his chest, the same hum he felt when he touched the glowing rock earlier. Only this time, it grew stronger, much stronger. His body trembled. Light flickered under his thin scales. His wings twitched, not from fear, but from something rising inside him like a bright fire. The young being turned, eyes widening as he saw the dragon glowing faintly. The older being stepped back in shock. The dragon didn't understand what was happening to him. Only that the warmth wasn't frightening. It felt natural. Like something long asleep inside him was finally waking up. The ground beneath him vibrated harder. Dust lifted into the air. His scales grew brighter. He could feel strength spreading through him, light. Energy, something powerful. And for the first time, he wasn't afraid of it. This was only the beginning of the awakening. The soft glow under the small dragon's scales grew brighter with every breath he took. The ruins around him trembled, the dust lifting into little swirls, as if the ground itself recognized the light rising inside him. He didn't understand this power, but it didn't frighten him. It felt like something he had been waiting for his whole life, something that belonged to him long before he was left alone on this quiet planet. The older beings in the chamber stepped back, their eyes wide. They hadn't expected this. They had always seen the small dragon as weak, harmless, unable to defend himself. Now the glow in his scales made them hesitate. Their scanners beeped rapidly, showing readings they had never seen before. The young being didn't step away. Instead, he stayed close to the dragon, as if trying to reassure him that he wasn't alone. His eyes were full of worry, not for himself, but for the creature he had quietly protected ever since the others arrived. The ground shook again. Small stones rolled across the floor. The light under the dragon's skin spread to his wings, which slowly unfurled, even though he wasn't trying to move them. Thin streaks of brightness ran along the edges of the wings, making them look almost transparent. One of the older beings shouted something and pointed a device at him. A beam of dull blue light shot forward, but the moment it touched the bright aura around the dragon, it faded into nothing. The older beings froze in shock. The dragon didn't attack. He didn't roar. He didn't show anger. He simply stood there, letting the warmth inside him rise like a gentle fire. His heart beat steadily, not fast or wild. It felt right, as if the power wasn't meant to harm anyone. It was meant to awaken something bigger. The chamber walls responded to the energy. The ancient symbols engraved into the stone began to glow again, brighter than before. They lit up one by one, forming circles and patterns around the dragon. The young being watched in awe, his mouth slightly open as he slowly backed away to give the dragon space. The older beings weren't sure whether to run or stay. One of them stepped toward the entrance, but the doorway flashed with pale light, blocking the exit. Not violently, but like a soft barrier made of energy. The dragon looked around, confused but calm. The light inside him grew so warm that he felt like he might float. He lifted his head slowly and took a long, deep breath. A wave of brightness expanded from his body, not loud, not explosive. Soft. Gentle. Like a warm breeze filled with light. The wave passed through the chamber, touching the walls, the floor, the machines, and the beings inside. Nothing was destroyed. Nothing was burned. Instead, the room felt warmer, more alive. The dull colors of the ruins brightened. The cracks in the stones stopped crumbling, and the broken patterns in the floor began to repair themselves. The older beings looked around in disbelief. They tapped their devices again and again, but the numbers on the screens didn't make sense. They weren't reading danger or decay. They were reading life. The wave of light continued to spread, escaping through cracks in the ceiling and flowing out across the barren planet. Outside, the dry ground absorbed the energy like thirsty soil drinking rain. Small patches of green flickered in the distance, tiny plants, trying to grow after years of silence. The dragon felt his legs shake. The glow slowly softened, his wings lowering back to their resting position. He looked exhausted, like someone who had run too far, but he wasn't in pain. He simply felt emptied, as if he had given a piece of himself to the world around him. The young being rushed to him, kneeling beside him with worry on his face. He reached out a careful hand, unsure if touching him would hurt. The dragon leaned gently into the touch, showing he was all right. Just tired. One of the older beings tried to approach, but the young one stood up and blocked him again. This time he wasn't scared or unsure. He spoke firmly, pointing at the dragon, then at the glowing ruins, then at the land outside. His voice echoed in the chamber with a strength none of the others expected from him. He wasn't asking permission. He was demanding that they leave the dragon alone. The older beings seemed shaken. They looked at the dragon again, at the gentle glow that still shimmered faintly in his scales, then at the young one's determined expression. They exchanged glances with each other, their earlier arrogance now replaced with uncertainty. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Finally, one of the older beings lowered his device. He said something in a quiet voice, almost like an apology. Another nodded, slowly. They seemed to realize that the small dragon wasn't a weak creature to be used or experimented on. He was something special, something ancient, something none of them had fully understood. They turned and walked toward the exit. This time the barrier of light faded, letting them pass. Their footsteps echoed as they made their way through the ruins, and back toward their ship. The young being let out a long breath of relief. He looked at the dragon and gently sat beside him on the floor of the chamber. He didn't speak. He didn't try to move him. He simply stayed there, keeping him company as the dragon rested. A soft breeze moved through the cracks in the ruins. The planet felt different, not empty, not forgotten, not dead. It felt like it was waking up, slowly, gently, just like the dragon. After some time, the dragon pushed himself to stand again. He wobbled slightly, but the young being steadied him with a light touch. The dragon looked around the chamber, then at the entrance. He seemed to know that his work wasn't finished yet. Something inside him told him that he wasn't meant to stay hidden anymore. He walked outside, the young being following beside him. The sky was brighter than before. The dull gray clouds had thinned, allowing soft golden light to shine through. Patches of green had started appearing across the rocky ground, small, glowing plants with delicate leaves that swayed like tiny lanterns. The dragon stepped onto the open land. As he moved, a faint trail of light followed his feet, causing more plants to sprout where he walked. The young being watched, amazed, but didn't touch or disturb anything. He simply walked next to him, letting the dragon choose the path. Far away, the older being's ship rose into the sky and disappeared among the clouds. There was no alarm, no warning, no last-minute attempt to take the dragon. They had seen enough. They knew they could not control him, and maybe, deep inside, they knew they were never meant to. The dragon continued walking until he reached a small hill. From there, he could see the land stretching far into the distance. The once barren world now had faint specks of green scattered across the surface. It wasn't much yet, but it was the beginning of something new. The young being stood beside him, the wind gently brushing against both of them. He looked at the dragon, then at the land, and smiled softly. The dragon hummed, a gentle, warm sound he hadn't made before. It wasn't a roar. It wasn't loud. It was like a peaceful melody, a quiet song of his ancestors. The sound drifted into the wind, carried across the land like a promise. The young being placed a gentle hand on his back. The dragon leaned into the touch. For the first time since he could remember, he didn't feel alone. Days passed. The plants continued to grow. The soil became softer. Colors returned to the planet slowly, like paint spreading on an old canvas. Animals, small, harmless ones, began to appear in the distance. They watched the dragon from afar, curious but not afraid. The young being stayed with him, caring for him, learning from him, and helping where he could. He built small shelters, collected tools he had saved, and created a safe space among the ruins where they could rest at night. He didn't speak much, but he didn't need to. The dragon understood him without needing many words. The dragon grew stronger each day, not just in power, but in spirit. His glow no longer came from fear or pain. It came from peace, from connection, from finally knowing where he belonged. One evening, as the sun set in gentle orange light, the young being sat beside the dragon on the hill again. The world around them looked more alive than ever. The dragon raised his head, breathing the fresh air that smelled faintly of new plants. He didn't know what his future held. He didn't know if more of his kind existed somewhere in the vast sky. But for the first time, he felt hope awarm. Steady hope that spread through his chest and made his scales shimmer. Softly, he looked at the young being beside him. He wasn't alone anymore, and the planet wasn't abandoned anymore. The little dragon had changed everything.